Recently, the G7, which of course consists of 6 of the most heavily indebted countries from around the world, gave rise to perhaps the strangest declaration by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, where he stated that the G7 should sell some of their gold to actually raise funds to save Africa. Macron, a former Rothschild banker, knows the game plan here, and today we investigate this, so let's dive on in. Now, this channel provides global macro insights and champions the importance of sound money in a world gone crazy, so please do consider subscribing. And so while Macron was widely denounced for his remarks, he knows exactly what he is suggesting here. In May, the French president agreed to work towards persuading rich nations to reallocate $100 billion in IMF special drawing rights, that's IMF SDRs, to African states, where he stated that impoverished African economies must not be left behind in the post-pandemic economic recovery, and a substantial financial package is needed to provide much needed economic stimulus. Now, Macron's strategy here makes it look like rich nations would be doing their bit for less economically developed countries, and it provides good PR for him. But we know these African countries have already been sold into debt traps by the IMF and World Bank. But what is more sinister about Macron's suggestion here is that it's the direct transfer of a nation state's held gold reserves, which would then be transferred to the global body of the IMF. Presently, the IMF holds just over 2,800 tons of gold. And so if the IMF were to purchase $100 billion worth of gold using their SDR funny money, it would buy around an extra 1,673 tons of gold at current prices. In fact, it would boost the IMF's gold reserves by around 60%. This would go a long way towards further beefing up the IMF's balance sheet ahead of their proposed new Bretton Woods monetary reset. But this is also important because we know that the IMF is facing key threats, which really questions the relevance of such an international institution. Consider firstly that it is being squeezed into acting quickly by the Chinese and their rapid development of the central bank digital currency. In particular, the design of China's CBDC would seem suitable for regional use of the digital yuan, and thus reduce the need and the power of the IMF to organise a Bangkok-style supranational currency. Now, this is something that the Chinese have been calling for as far back as 2012, and they are frustrated with the lack of progress that has taken place on this and the continued power of the dollar. But secondly, it also seems as if the IMF is now being forced into acting promptly due to the rise of cryptocurrencies and El Salvador's recent announcement that Bitcoin would be considered legal tender in the country. The IMF immediately moved to criticise El Salvador's decision and suggest that this may imperil a $1 billion loan to the country. Yet El Salvador's president has made a habit of upsetting Washington, and Bitcoiners have proposed that they could actually instead raise this money amongst themselves for El Salvador. And so if Macron succeeds in persuading G7 nations to part with some of their gold, it would lead to large-scale issuance of SDRs, special drawing rights, which would then be directed towards African countries for now. Now, analyst Tom Luongo believes that this would help to actually keep key African leaders compliant in supplying the Western nations with the key commodities needed for the G7's effective Green New Deal. Given China's presence on the African continent, securing Western access to key commodities would certainly seem vital. Meanwhile, Jim Rickards has long pointed out how massive issuance of SDRs is on its way, as the fund is the only effective lender of last resort with a clean balance sheet. Recently, IMF boss Georgieva has said that she would work with IMF members in the coming months on how they could reallocate some of their SDRs or use budget loans to actually reach or even exceed the $100 billion goal. But what's more is that the IMF is working on a resilience and sustainability trust that could allow its members to lend their IMF SDRs reserves to more countries, including middle-income countries, which the IMF states are vulnerable to climate change. Now, a more cynical viewpoint here may be the desire to further indebt middle-income countries to the fund, perhaps. Yet the idea of leaders like Macron selling what remains of the gold reserves of their countries is one I find deeply abhorrent. In the same way Gordon Brown conducted sales of the UK's gold in the early noughties, much of which headed eastwards. Or the fact that Canada's gold reserves have been completely sold off with apparently no concern over the price, as Canadian Finance Department spokesperson David Barnaby wrote in 2016. The decision to sell the gold was not tied to a specific gold price, and sales are being conducted over a long period and in a controlled manner. The government has a long-standing policy of diversifying its portfolio by selling physical commodities such as gold and instead investing in financial assets that are easily tradable and that have deep markets of buyers and sellers. Is it simply a coincidence Canada, like the UK under Gordon Brown, seemingly picked the bottom of the market to actually conduct these gold sales? I can't help but think not. And just this week I read a fascinating account of the real size of the United Kingdom's public government or taxpayer funded debt, courtesy of the Taxpayers Alliance. Now, the link here is in the description. So the real figure for assessing a country's debts is via the public sector net debt. Now, this figure includes unfunded public sector pension scheme liabilities, nuclear decommissioning, and the government's credit card, courtesy of Tony Blair's private finance initiative. In stark contrast to what our Chancellor may have declared recently in stating that he expects the national debt to reach £2.5 trillion by 2022, the total public sector net debt for the UK will be an eye-watering £9.6 trillion, or 423% of GDP by next year. On a per household basis, this amounts to around £344,000, or around $480,000 per household. Now, I'd imagine the figures would be very similar for France, and this makes Macron's suggestion even more despicable, given that gold revaluation offers a perfectly feasible means out of this current economic crisis and the sovereign debt crisis. After all, nothing deleverages sovereign debt crises like gold. So why would you advise selling gold to the fund, particularly when the gold market is being deleveraged in line with Basel III? Yet the lesson for us as individuals is clear. Do the exact opposite of what our governments do. Practice sound personal financial management, take on limited debt, diversify income sources, and hold a variety of assets which have the potential to perform strongly over coming years of turmoil. Thanks so much for watching. Do watch out for scammers using my image in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.